Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been really doing some deep dives at every single class spec over in the War Within Alpha, primarily highlighting and taking a close look at all of the different hero talents. And earlier in the weeks, I wanted to go over the prettiest hero specs from the Voidweaver, the Archon, and the Oracle, but initially the video was just going to be me praising the Void while kind of lambasting the Oracle since it was so underbaked. But this most recent Alpha build has really revitalized the Oracle with yet another set of updates, including a lot of the feedback from the priest community. And after being able to spend some time with my priest, I'm now even more excited to talk about all the 3 hero talent specs available for priests in the War Within Alpha between the new and improved Oracle, the Archon, as well as the Voidweaver, and how every single one of these playstyles is going to change and adjust your Shadow, your Disc, and Holy Priest going forward. But right before that, if you guys enjoy these kind of class updates for the War Within Alpha, soon to be beta, make sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So I first want to start off with the Voidweaver hero spec, and then I'm going to move on into Archon as well as Oracle, because, well, honestly, Voidweaver is the one hero spec out of all the class hero specs, or rather the hero talents, that I'm probably the most excited about. This one is the epitome of putting flavor together and changing your abilities, but also adding a little bit extra gameplay towards an iconic priest playstyle, while at the same time not overcomplicating that playstyle at the same time. It is perfect. It is mwah, chef's kiss. It is, I actually like Voidweaver a lot, and that alone gets me excited for priests in general. Voidweavers have dedicated themselves to study the origins of void magic and have discovered a way to tear open tenuous connection to the void. This power is incredibly dangerous and volatile, consuming anything in its path. And with the way that it sounds, the whole volatile, consuming everything in its path, you essentially get to summon black holes every time you use your Void Torn ability. This is going to be a little bit different for Disc Priest. I will go over how Disc Priest interacts with this ability and Voidweaver also, but first I want to go over how Shadow does. But essentially, yeah, every time you press your Void Torn ability, you summon what essentially is a black hole that moves towards the target, and you can see just how amazing that looks. The animation, the visual, it looks great. In fact, I think a lot of actually priest abilities have gotten quite a bit of that voidy spin to them. Even something like Void Crash, which is on the same row as Shadow Crash. Shadow Crash being a shadowy crash ability that you can control where it goes, while Void Crash will just auto-target the enemy, but it's essentially the same thing. But even the animation of it, it has this void tint to it. I love it. And even as you look at the Void Torn ability, that has a much more of this dark purple tint to it rather than like the original Shadow Priesty purple. I guess I don't really know how to describe it. Anyway, when taking a look at the actual ability, Entropic Rift is what you'll be playing around with. This rift opens up and for 8 seconds is going to slowly move towards an enemy, causing them to suffer shadow damage over time while within its reach. And then the rest of the hero talents, for the most part, play off of the Entropic Rift. When the Entropic Rift is active, certain abilities, depending if you're Disc or Shadow, change. And for Shadow, Entropic Rift upgrades your Mind Blast into a Void Blast while it is active, which deals a considerable amount of additional Shadow damage. And the way that the ability also looks is quite good in my opinion. This Void Blast, yeah. It even has a sound effect to it. It's so good. It is so... I'm a big fan. I'm just a huge fan. I'm going to be gushing about this one a lot. That's essentially the mechanic. You'll evoke the rift and then you'll get a couple of blasts in, and there's a couple of ways that these blasts can modify and interact with the rift also. On the right hand side, while we're in the same first row, we have Inner Quietus, at least I'm hoping to pronounce it correctly. Vampiric Touch and Shadow Repain deal a 20% additional damage, and that 20% buff to dot damage seems actually quite sizable. On the left hand side, it's a choice now between Dark Energy, where Void Torrent can now be used while moving. While Entropic Void is active, you move 20% faster, which is a fantastic way to give Shadow Priest a little bit more mobility without denying him that full value out of a Void Torrent, which I think would be very exciting. On the left hand side, it's actually kind of a flip of that, or Entropic Rift instead slows enemies by up to 70%. Increase the closer they are to the center of the rift, so if the enemy is caught in the actual middle of it, they're actually at their slowest, making it much harder for them to escape it, which I think is also quite exciting. On the bottom right, we have some new pet interactions with the Shadow Fiend or the Mindbender. Void Wrath transforms your Shadow Fiend into a Void Wrath that casts Void Flay, dealing up to 50% additional damage, dealing more damage to a higher health target. When you summon a Void Wrath, it's actually kind of like this void elemental that casts spells from a distance. Though if you are talented in things such as Inescapable Torment, you will still cause him to teleport closer to the target, but he'll just continue casting from a distance. It's a lot better at letting you focus on a healthier target, so it could give Priest a considerable bit of additional extra damage whenever like a new enemy or a fresh new target that used to be wiped out very quickly needs to be immediately swapped towards. On the other side, you can always pick up Depth of Shadows, where Shadow Word Death has a higher chance to summon a Shadow Fiend for 5 seconds when damaging enemies below 20% health. So instead of getting an upgraded version of a Shadow Fiend or a Mindbender, you can instead summon more Fiends and Mindbenders whenever enemy is in Execute range, which I think could be very exciting for a full-on Execute build. In the middle row, we have a couple of ways to modify interaction between Void Blast and the Entropic Rift. Either you have the Darkening Horizons, where Void Blast increases the duration of Entropic Rift by 1 second up to a maximum of 3 seconds. Or you can go on the left hand side, Void Empowerment, where summoning a Rift grants you a charge of Mind Devourer instantly. This Mind Devourer and the way that Rift interacts with Devouring Plague is going to be important as we get towards some of the later talents, but just remember there's a choice to either empower the Rift or make it last a little bit longer. On the left hand side, we have Devour Matter, which is still a bit bugged. Shadow Word Death consumes Absorb shields from your target, dealing up to 300% extra damage to them, granting you 5 insanity if a shield was present. So this kind of allows and lets you play into this whole black hole absorbs everything. So if the enemy does have a shield from you, you can eat away at that shield, which I think is a very unique mechanic that's going to come into, I think, play in certain situations. Bottom right hand side, we have another choice node with actually it's going to be one of the more fun ones. Again, even more flavor for the Voidweaver. Either Embrace the Shadow. Actually, let's take a look at Void Leech instead, because that one's going to be fun, and I think a lot of priests are going to run this just for funsies. Void Leech allows you every 2 seconds to siphon an amount equal to 3% of your health from a nearby ally if they have higher health than you. You're literally stealing health from a friend. You will actually be taking health from them with Void Leech. And I feel like if enough Shadow Priests are together in a raid, I imagine you can just stand next to somebody who's super healthy and just really put him in a tight spot in just a handful of seconds. That's a very fun one, but also, again, very flavorful. And that's my favorite part about this hero spec specifically, is just the amount of flavor that it has. And Void Leech is a very interesting survivability toolkit. Of course, if you don't want to be bothering your friends, you can go with Embrace the Shadow, where you absorb 3% of all magic damage taken. Absorbing shadow damage heals you for 100% of the damage absorbed. With it being a very void heavy expansion with Xalatath and the Void involved off the bat in the first raid and a couple of first dungeons of War Within, you're going to get a lot of value out of Embrace the Shadow. In the middle row, we have Void Infusion, where Void Blast generates 100% additional insanity. That's what allows Void Blast to basically be a better version of a Mind Blast. On the left hand side, we have Void Heart. While Entropic Rift is active, your shadow damage is increased by 10%, which is just going to buff everything you do inside of that Void Rift window. In the capstone trait, we have Collapsing Void. Every time you cast Devouring Plague, Entropic Rift is empowered, increasing its damage and size by 20%. After the rift ends, it collapses, dealing shadow damage split amongst all enemies within 15 yards, making it a little bit better for single target, but still doing decent damage even in AoE situations. And this kind of creates that gameplay loop that you want to play around the priest. So not only do you want to have your Void Blast available because they generate a ton of damage, but also a ton of insanity, but you also now want to funnel a bunch of Devouring Plagues inside of this Entropic Rift window. But it creates you a gameplay loop that's going to be fairly familiar for a lot of Shadow Priests, just lining up as much damage as you can inside of a very limited window. And it doesn't really change the playstyle too much, it doesn't complicate it too heavily, it just gives you a little bit extra additional gameplay to consider as you pick up your Priest within endgame content. Now, where I feel like Priest benefits the most out of this hero spec is going to be from a discipline side. And the way I play my healers a lot of the times as primarily DPS player, I play them very aggressively. So Voidweaver really allows Disc Priest to lean into this aggressive playstyle that became popularized, I think it was during Season 3 of Dragonflight, with a more aggro-focused tier. So you still have the same mechanic where instead of your Rift, now it's your Mind Blast that tears open a portal with an Entropic Rift. And instead of Mind Blast transformed into Void Blast, it is now your Smites that become Void Blast, so you can use them fairly regularly. With the Inner Quietus, you have a little bit more value gained on the Power Word Shield Absorbs. With the talent of Void Empowerment, summoning a Rift extends the duration of your 5 shortest atonements by 1 second, which could make it a little bit of a better option for maximizing atonement windows within PvE raid content. With Void Infusion, Atonement Healing with Void Blast is 100% more effective, which is going to enforce a more aggressive playstyle, as so will Void Heart, which actually increases the amount of Atonement Healing that you do by 10%. And with Collapsing Void, each time you cast Penance inside of Entropic Rift window, it increases damage and size by 10%, and after the Rift ends, it still does quite a decent bit of shadow damage split amongst enemies evenly. But this creates a more familiar playstyle that you might have been able to experience within the last few expansions, where you're able to go for a big kind of interaction with your now Void Wrath if you end up playing that kind of a pet, and trying to blast as many abilities as you can inside of this Rift window that allows you to really unleash a lot of that aggressive playstyle as often as possible. And you're playing heavily around the Mind Blast window with a Penance window. The only thing you don't really get right now is a cooldown reduction for your Void Wrath, which is a little bit unfortunate because you're no longer playing with a tier set of Dragonflight, but you still get a very powerful burst window where I feel like you might actually end up speccing out of Mindbender instead of going for other talents that unleash as much damage as possible during this window. Either way, this is going to be a slightly different playstyle that you remember from Dragonflight, but still a more familiar one, as it does allow Disc Priest to really lean into the aggressive healing in order to help supplement all of their allies. And with that being said, I think now we can move on into Archon, which, unlike Voidweaver, who's a bit more complex, a little bit more mysterious, there's a little bit of a hook to it, Archon is a lot more straightforward. Archons are highly devout and deeply connected to the light and shadow. Archons can be blessed from higher beings to enter into an ascended state, becoming an ultimate version of themselves. But even though this hero spec, the player text really sells it, for the most part you are a Halo priest. Whether you're holy, whether you're shadow, you're just a Halo priest, as the talent is going to buff up the damage of a Halo considerably. Power Surge allows casting Halo to cause you to create a halo around you at 100% effectiveness every 5 seconds for 10 seconds. Additionally, the radius of Halo is increased by 10 yards. And if you're looking at a full picture of how big the Halo ability looks like, you'll kind of see how it's going to pulse out, but also in. That's also part of the mechanic of how Halo functions. It's going to have a little bit of spread out, then back in, and spread out, or back in. And that's essentially the ability. This is essentially what's going to make your Archon priest different than every other priest. There's going to be a lot of talents that are going to amplify the value of your Halo, which we could take a look at immediately, such as Resonant Energy. Enemies damaged by Halo take 10% increased damage from you for 5 seconds. Casting Halo will grant you procs such as Surge of Insanity for Shadow Priest, which is the ability that transforms your next Mind Flame Insanity or Mind Spike Insanity to do additional damage and generate more resources. Halo now centers around the character and returns to you after it reaches maximum distance, healing allies and damage enemies each time it passes through them, which gives you like a double up on your Halo ability. Halo can then be further amplified with energy compression to do 30% more damage and healing, or you can have it play around your cooldowns with sustained potency. Casting Halo extends the duration of Dark Ascension or Void Form by 1 second. If Dark Ascension and Void Form are not active, up to 6 seconds is then stored and applied to the next time you gain Dark Ascension or Void Form. So this means you can either extend the duration of your next ability when you eventually use it, or simply extend the ability while it's currently active, which makes sure whether you're playing the Void Eruption or whether you're playing Dark Ascension, you never lose out any value on either one of these two abilities. From there on, we have a couple of other talents that we can take a look at as well, such as Perfected Form. Your damage dealt is increased by 10% while Dark Ascension is active, and by 15% while Void Form is active. So it simply just increases the value of all of your major cooldowns. Further below that, we have a choice now between Shock Pulse, which is going to be a bit more utility. Halo damage reduces enemies' movement speed by 25% and stacking up to 2 times. So that could be a 50% slow that constantly keeps attacking the enemy over and over, which could be quite nice. Or you can go with Incessant Screams, where Psychic Scream creates an image at your location, and after 4 seconds the image will let out a Psychic Scream as well. And the way that that looks is if you fear everybody, you see this image afterwards, and you can kind of just re-fear an enemy again. Depending on how you set it up, I feel like in Mythic Plus, this could be a fantastic disruption tool. In PvP, however, if you can somehow keep an enemy nearby, or maybe keep them trapped up or not really moving while they're feared, you could chain 2 fears into them, so there's some cool interactions that you could do as Archon. Down the middle, we have some more defensive options such as Heightened Alteration, which either increases the duration of dispersion by 2 additional seconds, or you can go with Ward of Supremacy. Power Word Fortitude grants you additional 5% stamina. Down below that, we get to amplify our PI, which, depending on who you are, and depending on what kind of priest you are, you either like that there's more interactions with PI, or absolutely hate it and want the ability gone from the game. Either way, Power Word Infusion as an Archon priest effect is going to give you 10% additional haste. So there's less of like, oh, okay, you need to play Archon, so both you and the target get 10% additional haste. This is more of a selfish haste use here. So at least, I guess, at least we're not complicating PI too much when going Archon. On the right hand side, we have Halo that grants you Surge of Insanity as Shadow Priest. It has a bit more interactions flowing downwards. Empowered Surges increases the damage done by Mind Flay Insanity and Mind Spike Insanity by 25%, increases the healing done by Flash Heal and Surge of Light by 30% for the Holy Spec. And below that, we have Energy Cycle. Consuming Surge of Insanity has a 100% chance to conjure a shadowy apparition. So there's a bit of a gameplay mechanic that you'll now want to utilize when playing certain playstyles and certain builds here. But as it stands, that is going to be Archon Hero Spec in a nutshell, which is a little bit different as Holy. As Holy still plays around with your Halo ability, which is going to become a much better raid-wide healing cooldown overall. On the right hand side, you will get Surges of Light buffs, however, instead of the Surges of Insanity procs, and you'll increase the damage and healing with Flash Heal and Surge of Light, and consuming Surge of Light reduces the cooldown of Holy Word Sanctify by 4 seconds. Sustained potency is going to be adjusted so it actually functions with your Apotheosis ability. So if you want to play with a stronger cooldown, like in 5-man situations, then Apotheosis and extended duration could actually be pretty good with Halo if you're looking for more bursty healing, like single target healing from your Holy Words, rather than pure Halo damage and healing increases. With Perfected Form, your healing done is increased by 10% while Apotheosis is active, and for 20 seconds after you cast Holy Word Salvation, which again empowers either your Salvation windows or your Apotheosis windows. And that's essentially the Archon playstyle. All you do is, for the most part, maintain healing on your allies and use the Halo ability to dish out quite a bit of extra additional AoE healing, which I think in a raid situation is not a bad one. And I feel like even in dungeons, playing this one as Shadow, playing this one as Holy, this is a solid hero spec. There's just nothing super special about it to that degree. Like, it's pretty strong. It seems to do good healing numbers right now. A lot of players seem to enjoy it, but like compared to the Void one, it's not as flavorful, it's not as unique, there's no specific visual cool thing about it besides Halo kind of spreading out, coming back in. It is a fairly box standard one that increases the output of either your healing or your Shadow playstyle. And that's not always the worst, because some players don't really want to be going into the War Within expansion, having to relearn a class altogether, and sometimes just getting passives that simply increase your overall output is all that some players really would want to see out of the classes going forward, and if that's the case, then Archon may actually be for you. Now, for the next hero spec, I wanted to go to a place that's a little bit darker, because we'll be talking about the Oracle, which I'm kind of glad that I delayed this video, because they actually updated the Oracle, so it's a little bit less annoying to play with. Oracle has been from the get-go a very interesting hero spec that essentially originally wanted to modify your power infusion to basically be the buff priest that gave you a variety of different enhancements, from a smaller haste window kind of like PI, but you could use it more regularly, or maybe like a healing increase on an ally, or a magic damage increase, a physical damage increase, and they decided to change it to focus on disc and holy to increase your overall healing output. And since then, they've been listening to the community feedback and been making adjustments to now have a more functional version of Oracle, which if I didn't delay this video, then we would have talked about the more janky version. But Oracles gain insight into the future and use it to protect and empower their allies. Future Sight grants Oracles the ability to gain multiple different and unique beneficial effects to their allies. Now, the to their allies part doesn't really make sense. It's more the buff towards your playstyle and towards yourself. You're going to be able to heal your allies and you'll be more effective at healing them, but the way the Oracle and these insights that you gain, they're more for you rather than for anybody else. And also, I wanted to go to a darker area just so you could see kind of what this looks like, because when you play Oracle, you gain these glowing eyes and an eye above your head as you're seeing into the future in front of everybody. It's so cool looking. Like, this was kind of a new development too. This was somewhat recently added, and while some hero specs have a very, very muted visual to them, Oracles, you'll be able to tell it's an Oracle Priest. The glowing eyes will really give it away, and it looks so good. Now, as for the actual Oracle ability, I am going to keep it over here just because you probably are going to need a weak aura or something to help you figure out which buff you have, but they've taken this ability and kind of went through a couple of different iterations, but you still need something extra just to help with the visuals and just tracking it. But the main ability for Oracle is going to be Premonition, a 45-second recharge ability where you gain access to a spell that gives you an advantage against your fate. Premonition rotates to the next spell after you cast one of its given buffs, and there's 3 current buffs available for Premonition that will rotate in the order that you see here, starting with Premonition of Piety, which increases your healing done by 5%, and any overhealing on players will be redistributed to 3 nearby allies for 10 seconds, which essentially just increases your overall healing power and makes sure that your healing abilities do not get wasted. The next one is going to be Premonition of Insight, which reduces the cooldown of an X3 spellcast by 5 seconds. This one is actually kind of huge, especially as a Disc Priest, because this allows you to set up Mind Blast, Penance, combos, and this gives you quite a bit of that damaging output where the cooldown reduction actually can go a long way. Now, the last ability or last buff you're gonna get is Premonition of Solace. That is the only buff you can place on other allies. Your next single target healing spell increases the target's healing received by 25% for 10 seconds. So if you put this on a Blood DK, for example, they'll just take 25% more healing. If you put this on a Monk, they'll just be able to heal themselves easier. If you throw it down and all the other healers in a raid start healing that target, they'll heal them for 25% more. So it's kind of like a way for you to buff any type of healing on that target, which is a very interesting buff and could give Oracles a very awesome burst heal window to a primary target. And from there on, we find a lot of other talents that can help customize and empower your Oracle Priest. Starting off with the first row, we have things such as Miraculous Recovery. Cooldown of Power Word Life has been reduced by 3 seconds and allows you to use Power Word Life, which can normally be used on allies whenever they are below 35% health. You'll instead be able to use this burst heal ability on allies that are below 50% health, so you can get a lot more value a little earlier. On the opposite side, we have Waste No Time. Premonition causes your next heal or prayer of healing to be cast instantly and costs 15% less mana, which can be used to line up some fantastic AoE healing situations. In the middle first row, we have Preemptive Care, which increases the duration of atonements by 1 second and the duration of renew by 3 seconds. On the left hand side, we have Preventative Measures, which increases healing done of Prayer of Mending by 15%, and I'm pretty sure it's powered shields for Disc Priest, and we'll go over the Disc Priest changes after we look over Holy. And in the second row on the right hand side, we have Foreseen Circumstances, where Guardian Spirit lasts 2 seconds longer, which gives you a little bit more value for that healing buff that it provides. In the middle row, we have a choice now between Save the Day. For 6 seconds after casting Leap of Faith, you may cast it a second time for free, ignoring its cooldown. So if you need to be able to grip multiple allies at once, then Save the Day is going to be pretty good for it. Again, I like this ability and how you can play around with the, I guess, the mobility of priests, because they don't actually move, but they can move an ally to them, which I think can be useful in some situations. On the flip side, we have Divine Feathers. Your Angelic Feather increases your movement speed by additional 10%. When an ally walks through an Angelic Feather, you are also granted 100% of its effect. So if you have a macro where you for the most part use Angelic Feathers on yourself like I do, you may want to start using them to place for allies, because every time they pick one up, it grants you movement speed, so even more reason for you to share. On the left hand side, we have Assured Safety, where Prayer of Mending casts apply Power Word Shield to your target at 25% effectiveness, which is kind of fun, especially if you can get a bunch of these Prayer Mendings to apply to multiple allies very quickly. And in extra, we have even more choice nodes with Perfect Vision, which reduces the cooldown of Premonition by 15 seconds, allowing you to use it more regularly, which gives it a 45-second cooldown. Or you can go with Fate Bender, which increases the effectiveness of Premonition by 30%. In the middle row, we have Divine Providence, where Premonition gains an additional charge, which makes it a little bit more easier to work with, where when you use an ability just with one charge, it's a little bit harder for you to set up a big healing combo. On the left hand side, we have another choice node with Desperate Measures. Desperate Prayer lasts additional 10 seconds. Angelic Bulwark's absorption effect is increased by 15% of your maximum health, which makes you want to lean into the Angelic Bulwark defensive play. Or you could pick up Prophet's Well. Your Flash Heal, and Holy Word Serenity are 30% more effective when cast on yourself, so if you need a quick boost of healing, just a quick Flash Heal and you should be able to top yourself off even easier. In the final capsule, we have Clairvoyance. After casting Premonition of Solace, which is the last in your whole 3 Premonition rotation, your next Premonition grants all of your Premonition effects at 100% effectiveness. So what that means, whenever you get Solace and you press it, you want to make sure not to press the button way too quickly, because it immediately goes into Clairvoyance. And there's been a couple of times where I've actually pressed it twice really quickly in a row, but eventually after you go through all of your Premonition buffs, you then get Clairvoyance, which is going to grant you all 3 effects at the same time. So it's going to be, I think, a very interesting, but also to some degree, a very complicated hero spec to pick up. Now, between all of the 3 different specs here, I definitely enjoyed Voidweaver a ton. I feel like Voidweaver gives you a very clear window to be able to utilize a lot of value inside of this very hyper-aggressive playstyle, which I think synergizes with Shadow, but also synergizes with Disc, since I really enjoy aggressive hero playstyles in general. The Archon, while does seem a little bit more on the simpler side, it is an effective hero spec that simply amplifies everything that you do. There isn't too many new things for you to pick up in terms of some of the gameplay interactions that you have as an Archon, but that's not what everybody wants to see. And the empowered halos, I think, end up working out pretty well for Shadow in AoE content, but also I can imagine Holy Priest doing some wonders within raiding content with that cooldown as well. Oracle, in comparison, is actually one of the more complex hero specs. They did end up really reducing a lot of its overly engineered PI style playstyle, where you're looking to empower your allies, and they kind of being able to streamline the buff to be something that empowers your healing or allows you to focus on healing your allies, whether it is more healing with some overflow healing that doesn't get lost in the communication, or Premonition Insight, which allows you to get some cooldown reduction, which could be very interesting but also a little bit complex to play, because reducing certain abilities at a certain times could give you a massive advantage and increase your overall healing output. Or even things such as Premonition and being able to give a bunch of burst healing to an ally, but also the way the priests are going to end up utilizing Clairvoyance buff, which allows you to gain all 3 buffs at the same time. I feel like that's going to be the complexity part of Oracle. And I'm sure guide writers will be able to find out best ways to translate how you should end up utilizing the Oracle Premonition ability in order to gain the most amount of value. But I feel like Oracle, out of those 3, is probably going to be the most complex one, where a good priest will be able to maximize that Clairvoyance window to get a ton of value out of it. But I don't really know how a new player will actually end up playing Oracle, and I feel like the amount of choices that you can make with the spells and the buffs and the rotation and trying to maximize the full value out of those buffs, and the fact that you have 2 charges of Premonition allows you to maybe hold a charge until the right moment, that extra layer of complexity I feel could potentially turn new players away from the hero spec, as exciting as it looks to me personally. But that's honestly going to be my opinion, and my opinion doesn't really matter as much. At the end of the day, I really want to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on the Oracle Priest, and do you think it is still maybe too overly complex or overly engineered, or do you actually like the direction they're going with this one? What are your thoughts on the DPS, very aggressive Voidweaver, as well as some of the visuals that it presents when you play Shadow or Discipline? Also, what are your thoughts on the Archon? Are you like me and thinks it's probably going to be pretty box standard, pretty simple, or do you actually like it a ton, and are you excited about that Halo playstyle that modifies and enhances your Shadow on Holy Priest? Let me know which one of these hero specs you're currently excited about in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.